Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to our Star Wars News Live. This is, for those of you following, attempt number 3, but good news for everybody. I'm looking at the screen right now, our YouTube studio page, and guess what it says? It says excellent connection. So hopefully, hopefully that means we're back. Make sure you send in your chats to the chat. For the last 2 streams that crashed, we have record of everything. We'll get to the chats first come, first serve. There were a lot of chats in the other rooms. So we'll try to get to those from here. But as always with these new streams, we're going to run down a couple topics here. This time relating to the sorry, I was reading some of the chats. I've been worried, kind of worried that something's going to go wrong. But this time related to Comic Con. Star Wars didn't have the big reveals like Marvel did with Comic Con. Unfortunately, we got no real information about any new TV or film projects. We didn't get an announcement like Doomsday for Avengers, but we did get some cool publishing information. And last week we talked about the comic side of it. Last week's stream was kind of right in the middle of the beginning part of the Comic-Con announcements. And then recently we did just get a bunch of book announcements. So we're going to talk about these books that tie into Andor Season 2 and then also the Acolyte, a lot of stuff that's going to give some prelude information about the Acolyte. So we're excited to talk about those things. As always, send in your chats. It doesn't have to be about those topics. If you are sending in a question about those topics or a comment, we will answer it as we're going through those sections. Otherwise, everything else we will get to after the stream, or not after the stream, after we're done talking about each topic. So send in those questions, and it can be about anything. I saw in last chat room we had a question from Ovier about Deadpool 2 or Deadpool 3, excuse me. Anything you want to talk about, Marvel, DC, whatever, send it into the chat and we will get to it. We'll go a little longer because we've had so many problems today, but hopefully we get to everything you guys want to talk about. And then we shall end the stream when you guys are good and ready. If you'd like to support the channel, send in a super chat. It does get your chat bumped up to the top in case we don't get to everything. But that is completely up to you, and it is your choice to do so. You can check out our Patreon and YouTube memberships as well if you're interested. We do have some of our members in the chat today. We always appreciate your support. So thank you so much for your contributions as always. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it over here to Sanak for our first topic, which is revolving around a new book trilogy.
Yeah, now hopefully everything works out great here. But we really want to talk about this book trilogy because it is pretty fascinating. It is called Reign of the Empire. First one's going to come out February 2025, titled The Mask of Fear, written by Alexander Freed, best known for Alphabet Squadron, Twilight Company. Really experienced with a lot of the military, gritty elements of Star Wars. And, it'll be great to read something that has the cover of Mon Mothma in a season that should hopefully have a little bit more integral to the plot. So, yeah, very excited for that. But we know after February 2025 and spring 2026, we're going to get book 2 from Rebecca Roanhorse, best known for Resistance Reborn, which is a pretty underrated book there in between episodes 8 and 9. And, really excited to see what she can do. And then the third book will be spring 2027, written by Fran Wild. And this book is from someone who's, done a lot of the from a certain point of view books. So a lot of the kind of tiny, small, short stories that are not just singular authors. So this will be her first real stab at a novel. But in general, this trilogy is not like a narrative trilogy. It's going to have a lot of different POVs. It's going to have a lot of different people from the beginning of the Empire, from more 10 years down the line around Kenobi, Jedi Survivor era, and then right before or maybe even during Battle of Endor, Battle of Jakku for the reign of this empire. Like, what is it like to live under these conditions? What are the politics like? How are people, emerging? How are people resisting? This will be a really interesting book, and I think it'll pair really nicely with that recent in-universe book that we got. I forget what it's called, but it's about like the imperial history, the rise of the empire there.
Yes.
So this will be a nice compliment. We'll see stuff that hopefully has an impact, hopefully has meaning and weight for what's going to be going on with the eventual First Order, what's going to go on with the eventual storytelling of the Empire, its collapse, and then how it's kind of reborn in these different elements. But it'll be nice to just really get a canon, really serious book about this. This is not a story that, I don't think live action has ever done truly well until Andor, and definitely not animation. But books let you have all these POVs. Books let you just focus in on every detail that you don't have time for on the screen. So I'm very, very excited for this book.
Absolutely, me too. Alexander Freed is an awesome choice to write this. He writes very, very detailed military fiction, and I think it's going to work really well in a political thriller. I think these books are going to be awesome. I think it's another side of Star Wars that we haven't seen much in canon. We did see it a bit more in Legends, these kind of dense politics and war books. Alexander Freed is really one of the only ones who has written that style in canon. I would say the only other one out there really is Catalyst by James Luceno, and I kind of wish he was doing one of these three books because I think he would have done a phenomenal job, especially as you build up towards the Death Star and all of that side. If the Ursos are involved in these stories at all, or Krennic, he has such a great grasp on those characters. I would have loved to see him come back. It's been so long since he's written Star Wars, so I'd love that. Other than that, uh, I'm excited. I have read Resistance Reborn. I was underwhelmed with it. I know a lot of people do like it. I was kind of underwhelmed just by the nature of everything sequel back then. It didn't do much for the story. It was a fun Finn and Poe book with some other characters that tie in. I love the other tie-ins to like Battlefront 2 and that type of stuff, but ultimately it was relatively underwhelming for me. Maybe a reread post, Rise of Skywalker where it's kind of settled, that hype's kind of settled. I'd like it a little more because I do know a lot of people who do like it. But excited for Rebecca to get her second chance. And then Fran Wild, I know nothing about. I have read some of the stories from a certain point of view, some of each of the three. So I've kind of read the ones that have been most interesting to me. I can't remember if she's written any of the ones that I've read, but I'm excited to see new authors in Star Wars. I always do appreciate new authors in Star Wars. Sometimes they can be massive hits, like we've seen with Adam Christopher for Shadow of the Sith, or sometimes they can be misses, like Sam Maggs with Jedi Battle Scars. So we'll see. Hopefully, she brings something interesting. I think to conclude a trilogy of books, you need somebody who can bring that power, and hopefully she brings it. But yeah, this is a really exciting announcement. We've been wondering because we haven't had book announcements for a while. We've been wondering what's coming next. Del Rey this year and Penguin Random House has kind of surprised us with the how early the book releases are ending this year. We only have one more adult book for the rest of the year, and that is the Mace Windu book, Shattered Abyss. So, or Glass Abyss, excuse me. I got it mixed up with Shatterpoint. So Glass Abyss is coming out in October. It was supposed to be coming out in August. It's now pushed to October, and then we don't have any more books until it looks like Reign of the Empire is going to be our first adult book of 2025. So that's pretty exciting. It does beg the question, and we'll kind of go into that for the next one too. And I brought this up to Sanak the other day when this was announced. It begs the question, what's happening with Trials of the Jedi, the final book in the High Republic Phase 3, the final book and what we think will be this kind of main High Republic story. What happens with that? Because that has been spring 2025. It still has not had any update on its release date since the original announcement for it, which was, I believe, about a year and a half ago. So I'm kind of worried that Charles Soule's finale is getting pushed back to the end of the year with this release in February. And then the next book we're going to talk about from the Acolyte tie in releasing in May. It would be surprising if they basically did 3 books in like 3.5 months, but maybe we'll see. That's my only damper basically from this story. Otherwise, I think this is a very exciting announcement. I'm excited to go deeper into this time period of Star Wars. And I think Andor is so ripe for brilliant political storytelling connected to it, especially in the novel format. So couldn't be more excited. But as I alluded to, Senek, what's our next topic?
Yeah, and this is the exciting thing about Comic-Con being about pop culture, about books especially, and especially comic books. And Star Wars didn't fail us there. I think one of the biggest things I was fearful of about Marvel's The High Republic run right now is that it felt like we were just accelerating to an end that wasn't there for the characters yet. It's been fun, don't get me wrong, but I was like, I need more time. There's especially in the last 2 issues, there've been a lot of issues that have been happening between these characters, and I'm like, "There is no way this story can be connected." And luckily for us, we are getting another main line to finish off Phase 3 called Fear of the Jedi. Just still gonna have Q Trennis, Skier, and everyone else. They showed off a cover for that. Really excited for that. Glad it's gonna be, like, a proper, like, run here as opposed to just being like, "Oh, one super jumbo issue to finish off a story that isn't quite there yet or is like hurtling towards something that is more like a step towards the next part of the story as opposed to the conclusion." And then we also got like real first time Disney Plus shows getting multimedia tie-ins, and that's really exciting. We know that we're going to get a Jecki and Yord novel, a young adult one. But for those people who have not seen it, you might have seen the trailers. Those are kind of like the two young Jedi faces of the Acolyte, and yeah, they're gonna get their own story set before the Acolyte. It's should be great for really fleshing out characters. And both of us made a big point of saying in our reviews that hey, these are two characters that have a lot of potential, have a lot of appeal, especially to what's going on with the narrative, to the characters involved in it with the Acolyte. But they don't really get a lot of time or development just because of the way these episodes were cut so short, and there's not really a lot of connected tissue before the action really starts kicking into gear. So yeah, definitely looking forward to this book. But the one that we're really excited for, like as far as all these announcements are, it's definitely the Acolyte Wayseeker. These are old temporary covers, but there is a cover out there with Vernestra, with Indara. And just today we got a leaked synopsis, I believe, from Amazon or somewhere around there. But we are gonna really dive into what's going on with this character, Vernestra, who is pretty different. Like, she has cynicism and everything, especially in Phase 3, but she's not really, like, playing this political game. She's not really trying to keep things away from the Senate. She's not covering up for things that she's been doing, right? And whenever you have a character that jumps, like, more than a decade in Star Wars storytelling, it gets really hard to, like, see why they have changed, right? This is a thing that I felt with Luke, even though I really enjoy The Last Jedi Luke, and I understand his motivations and his hesitancy and then his eventual mistake against Ben. We don't see anything that's going on in his head. We don't see those visions. And those years where we need to see his academy, we need to see his rise and his fall, especially after Mandalorian season 2, and especially after the Book of Boba Fett. Like, yeah, this is absolutely important for us to check out. And I'm excited to know what that really means as a storytelling device. I'm excited is what Wayseeker is going to do for us here. But the thing that I'm most excited for is the synopsis, which is where Vernestra Rowe is supposedly having spent over a decade exploring the Outer Rim as a Wayseeker, like Indara Stokes from Phase 1 of the High Republic, answering to no other authority but the Force itself. When a request from the Jedi Council orders her back to Coruscant, Vernestra initially refuses, feeling that her first priority should be to the beings she's already serving. But after Jedi Master Indara arrives to ask for Vernestra's aid in person, Vernestra finds herself pulled back into Coruscant's complicated world of Republic politics and underworld crime. As the two delve further into their investigation and the lines between Jedi and Republic business blur, Vernestra must reconsider what it means to serve for light in life. And that's a fascinating logline. This is something that I have been begging for, like the moment we saw Vernestra's characterization. I'm glad that Disney Plus shows now have the option of, especially the live action shows, to really expand out in multimedia. That's the best part about Star Wars releases, especially big ones. You get to see story continued and grown out in a really natural and fun ways. But this is one that feels like essential to at least getting an idea for why she is where she is the moment we see her in the Acolyte. So yeah, very exciting book here. I know, Liam, you're not the most high on the Acolyte in general, but what are your thoughts
Yeah.
on these 3 releases?
I'm pretty excited for these, to be honest. I think one of the things I'm most excited for about these releases is the thing that's at the top of the temporary artwork, which is it says set in the era of Star Wars: The High Republic. And I think that kind of can allude to what's next from the High Republic. I don't really want a Phase 4. I don't really want a Phase 5. I think Phase 4 I'd be okay with if they decide to go back and do the Phase 2 to Phase 1 story, how that 150 years finishes out and how we get to where we are in Phase 1. Other than that, I don't really want like another big conflict between the end of phase 3 and phase or and the Acolyte, excuse me. So I like the idea of doing certain little character stories in between and fleshing out things as we build towards the Acolyte. Now, when it comes to the Acolyte, I don't necessarily want like everything they do in that time to be connected to the Acolyte. I would love to explore new or other characters. It doesn't all have to be connected to the events of the show, but I do think it will definitely help the show, especially as we possibly get towards a season 2. As we work our way there, if they can continue to flesh out the characters in between, especially Vernestra, I think it will be incredibly helpful for people like us, for completionists, at least to kind of understand the motivations of certain characters who were, frankly, completely left out of the show. Like we have no real motivations for Vernestra. She's connected vaguely by the end of the show with everything going on. So I'd love to see more from her. Indara was an awesome character, and she had basically nothing, kind of the least developed of all four of the Jedi from the flashback. So I'm excited to see more of her. And I think just in general, this is a good idea. It's something that we should be getting. We have, like you said, gotten very loose multimedia connections to the Star Wars canon. We haven't really seen a direct connecting book to Star Wars canon films since Rogue One with Catalyst, a Rogue One story. Other than that, there's been the journeys to the Force Awakens and Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker, but none of those stories really connect to what we've seen in the films. They haven't really expanded upon anything or given us any definitive information. So I hope that Wayseeker is something relatively definitive. It won't be something that changes season 1 forever. It won't be something that changes season 2, but at the very least, it can provide more context about why Vernestra is the way she is and how she's changed so much across these 100 years. So I'm pretty excited to find out if that works. Justina Ireland has been very consistent when writing for Nestra specifically. I think she's done a really solid job overall with Vernestra. And really, it's been that other group of characters that haven't been my favorite when she's done her YA books, um, Sylvester Yarrow and all those characters. So getting away from that group and allowing her to just dive into Vernestra more. She's done a great job every time she's focused on Vernestra. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. As for the Jecki and Yord book, I liked both of those characters, especially Jecki. I really liked Jecki. And so I think exploring their backstory, now that spoilers for people who possibly haven't seen the Acolyte, now that they're dead, I think it does add more to their deaths. So every time you watch the show, you feel a little differently because you've read more about them and you know more about maybe their antagonistic friendship. You know a bit more about who they are and what makes them tick. And those are things that were left out of the show. I think, frankly, Jecki and Yord, two characters that didn't really need the depth in the show that the main characters did, but nonetheless, it will help them out. So excited for all that, and yeah, it's looking like a relatively bright future here for the High Republic, continuing after Phase 3. But that being said, again, this book is coming out May 6th, and we still don't know Trials of the Jedi's date. So possibly you're getting this Vernestra story, which takes place after Phase 3, before you get the end of phase 3, which seems really strange. So I'm hoping we get an announcement soon here about Trials of the Jedi. No, even though it's a crammed period, it's still coming out in March or April. Probably wouldn't be March because of the end of February release for the last book we talked about. So I'm hoping for that, but it seems like, yeah, we could get more of an extra story without finding out really the direct connections to Phase 3, which I think is kind of weird. Like, I feel like they should definitely play off of Phase 3 because especially because she was a big character in the last adult novel. So it's not like she won't be that involved with the end of the event. She'll be there and she's going to be a prominent figure. So hopefully we see that. But yes, very excited for these two books. And we do have some other comments about these books. Anthony says, just found out yesterday that about the novel Wayseeker, I'm excited to see what Vernestra was doing in the years leading up to the Acolyte. Yeah, we definitely agree with that, Anthony. And then in our chat here, Darth Delgado says, Already pre-ordered Mask of Fear. Can't wait to get a deep dive into the politics this time. Yeah, it's looking very exciting. So hopefully we have some big things coming here for Star Wars publishing. But we do have a big Star Wars release that is coming in about a month. And Sonic, what was our next story related to that?
Yeah, so Star Wars Outlaws, we saw it last week and we discussed a little bit about like the 10 minutes that were released that people were not very happy about. They were like, this is unpolished. The animation around like explosives and all that don't look the best, right? But the thing is, we all had this lurking suspicion that it was like a pre-build before it had been locked down as gold, which means the video game is ready to be deployed. Of course, there's day one patches and everything; those are standard now. But a lot of Star Wars influencers, a lot of gamers got a chance to actually play this game a couple of weeks ago, and were told to withhold on their coverage, right? So people like Star Wars Explain, Eckhart's Ladder, Skill Up, Azatru, right? Like these are pretty big, notable Star Wars gaming channels and Star Wars coverage channels, and they got to try out the game over a 4-hour period almost, which I mean, that's gonna tell you a lot more than just 10 minutes from some random location in Tatooine, right? So, yeah, no, I think the general consensus is that it is a lot better than what the IGN, like, previews have been kinda showing us. Those have not really been the strongest things. Those have been more about, like, fleshing out, like, the narrative and the gameplay mechanics. This is, like, just straight up, like, what is it like to walk around in the world? What is it like to experience these NPCs? Is there a lot of content outside with the side missions, with the mini games that will draw you in, right? And like one of the biggest things that everyone is talking about is Sabak is done so well here. It's like an addictive game. All the mini games are so fun to dive into, and I'm excited to hear about that. It looks like even using your data spike to hack into systems and all that. It's like a little bit more rhythm based. That these places are full. Like the Kijimi is one of the ones that people have been really highlighting. The one thing that people have been saying a little negatively, even if they're like fully convinced that the immersion and everything has been great, is the speeder bike does feel a little bit wonky, that it doesn't feel like really weighty, and the ship that you're flying around in the game is pretty simplistic in its usage, right? It does feel pretty floaty, not a lot of weight to it, especially since it is like a very freighter design. But yeah, no, it looks like people are a lot more positive on it. They got to share some of the footage. I've been spending a lot of today just kind of looking through all that stuff. Yeah, and it looks better. I won't say it's going to be anything super special, but I think I'm really impressed that everyone's saying that it is an immersive game. You can put hours into it, that this is more in line with games that Massive has done, like the recent Avatar game, as more as and not as opposed to like the other Ubisoft titles like Assassin's Creed and whatnot. So yeah, no, I am very excited for what's gonna come next out of these games. I'm very excited to be rid of the EA exclusivity. And I think Ubisoft through Massive has a chance to really deliver a strong game here. And, we'll try to cover it as best as we can. We're not really a gaming channel per se, but if there's some really interesting things, if we can put out a quick review from our own playthroughs, we definitely will do that.
Yeah, I think we want to talk about it for sure, especially because it's probably our last major Star Wars release for at least 4 or 5 months. So I would love to talk about it. We tried to let's play Jedi Survivor, and it didn't really do that well for the channel. So I don't think we're going to do full let's play, and it would be a lot harder with an open world game. It's going to be difficult to go through the entire story on stream. But I'm very excited to talk about it, and I had pretty similar impressions from watching the footage. It is a game that looks incredibly immersive, and I think that's a huge first step. Like right off the bat, that's going to win points with most of the fans. My big concern every time we've talked about the Outlaws game is going to be the fact that Ubisoft doesn't have the greatest track record in the world. Excuse me. In the past, they have made some great open world games, kind of one of the founders of that formula. But as the formula has evolved and changed with different creators and different studios taking it on and adding so many different things to it, Ubisoft has kind of fallen behind. They've gotten stale. They've gotten repetitive. And I'm more concerned about hour 30 in an open world game than I am about the first 4 hours, the first 10 hours. So I don't think this has changed my concerns overall with the quality of the product. That being said, I love seeing how immersive this is. Like, if they didn't make it immersive, if they didn't make it look and feel like Star Wars, then already it's, dropped points, right? Like, that's the number one thing they have to do. This is Star Wars' first ever open world game. And I'm very open to the fact that this doesn't have to be a great game. Like, I'm happy with this being a 7 out of 10 game, and I will go and play it probably more than I would normally play a 7 out of 10 game and enjoy it and want a sequel. And I think that's the main thing they have to get is make it addictive, make the gameplay loop fun, and make it enjoyable and Star Warsy. Like, just like the visuals, make the missions Star Wars. Make it feel like you are truly a part of Star Wars playing through the game. So when you get to hour 30, when you get to hour 50, you're still enjoying the Star Wars experience. You're not less interested because it's a bunch of typical repetitive open world gameplay game loops. So hopefully they do that. But I am impressed with a lot of the visuals around this game, and I'm excited to play it. We're less than a month away now, and it is going to be a fun time to get back into Star Wars gaming. It's been what, a year and a half since Survivor or more, so pretty exciting to finally get a Star Wars game and finally get our first open world Star Wars game. So I'm very excited for the future. Let us know what you guys think about the Outlaws footage in the chat, and let us know also if you want to see reviews for it, because we did a review of Jedi Survivor last year. It was a little later than most channels. It is tough to do video game reviews because if you're not getting the early access, you can't really put out a review because there's 50 reviews out by the time we're able to get 30 or 40 or 50 hours into the game, especially with this not being our number one money maker job right now. So let us know what you think about Outlaws, and if you'd like to see us doing a full playthrough or maybe a couple episodes where we play through, or a review at least of the story, or a general review, maybe like 10 hours in or 20 hours in, see what we think. Let us know if you want to see all that. Critical Thinker 066 says, I don't trust modern Ubisoft to pull off Outlaws, particularly given the mess that is Assassin's Creed Shadows marketing. And I'm with you, a Critical Thinker. I mean, I can't really think back to an open world game. I feel like it's Odyssey is the last time. Assassin's Creed Odyssey is the last one they've had that's been a massive success. And I believe that was 2017. So it's been a while. It's been a long while. Even in Assassin's Creed, the last few, I've completely fallen off of Assassin's Creed because there's so many. There's too many, and there's a lot of content. Valhalla, I heard, was pretty good, and I did put like 10 hours or so into Valhalla, but I never finished it. I think the last time I truly played through a full Assassin's Creed game was Odyssey. And so yeah, I don't necessarily trust that this is going to be an excellent game. I really don't. I'm still pretty firm on that, and I probably will be until about 15, 20 hours into the game when I can really judge the product for myself. But hey, hopefully they do deliver a good product, because all we really need are good Star Wars games to get us back into the glory days of Star Wars gaming.
Yeah, and to add to that, I get where you're coming from. Yes, AC Shadows has had a lot of internet discourse, but again, this is through Massive, which is a little bit better of a reputation under Ubisoft. They didn't get a lot of marketing for the Avatar Frontiers of Pandora game, but that is really well received from the people who have played that game. Hopefully, that means that that same innovation, that same level of attention has been given to this Star Wars game. I mean, there's discourse around Outlaws too, people complaining about how Cave Vess's model looks like and all that, but I think that's just a general indictment of the game. Like, the game is not something superb looking visually. I would not say this is a better looking game to me than Jedi Survivor is with the character models, especially. I will say that it does feel like the world's more filled out and lived in, but that's also the nature of being a scoundrel, going through a lot of these outposts and towns, and not necessarily living on the edges of society. And this is a game that's going to focus on stealth. That's a big thing that a lot of these 4-hour impressions are given. Like it will punish you if you're not really stealthy. It'll
Mhm.
force you to drop weapons that you pick up at different points in the game. Like this is someone who has to use their wits, their abilities, Nyx, the companion, more often than not, than going in crazy like Cal Kestis and being like, I have all the abilities, right? So yeah, hopefully that is more what this game is leaning towards. Assassin's Creed Shadows, yeah, they've got a lot to go with, problem wise, yeah, but it's not just the discourse, it's also like, have that recent Assassin's Creed game been great? Not really, and they've kind of lost their steam, especially being a very assassin-based series, right? By having Ghost of Tsushima kind of come out a couple years ago, become that game that all these Assassin's Creed fans wanted out of the Japanese setting. So they were always on the back foot. So yeah, it's a tough one, I will admit, but I think I'm gonna suggest maybe looking more at Massive's output as opposed to just Ubisoft as a whole.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's very fair too. A critical thinker says, "A hard agree. I liked Odyssey in spite of its flaws, but Valhalla was boring slog." It was. It was hard to get into, and that's really what killed it for me because I got it. I'd kind of fallen off Assassin's Creed. I used to be a huge Assassin's Creed guy. Like I religiously played those first 5 games or so, and then 3 was the one that the ending. I didn't really enjoy the story much in 3, but I still was on board and a Black Flag is one of the best ones that got me back on board. But then Unity was a disaster, and then um, Syndicate I really enjoyed, but it is a pretty standard gameplay loop for an open world Assassin's Creed game. But it was a lot of fun, set in like an industrial era England. But yeah, I played a little bit of Origins, never finished it, and then Odyssey I played pretty much the completion, and Valhalla was the one that kind of just put it off for me because it's been up and down. But I think one thing about Star Wars, one Outlaws versus like Assassin's Creed, right, is I feel like we should honestly be even more critical of Outlaws because this is a flagship game. It's not Assassin's Creed has turned into Call of Duty and Battlefield and all these other games that come out once a year. So there are going to be problems with just the mass production of them, and you kind of just have to expect that if you're interested in the gameplay loop. This should be a perfect polished game. This should be something that it doesn't have a release date that they have to put it out. They've chosen the end of August, and so that means it really should be perfect. There's nothing saying this game has to come out in the end of August. It doesn't connect to any stories that are particularly advancing where they got to worry about spoilers. It is its own product. And so I think that for me will be where I even judge this game a little more harshly than a game that in a series that is forced to come out every single year. I think this needs to be great and at least needs to not be buggy and at least needs to feel immersive. I don't know if I don't think it's going to be the world's greatest open world game. For those players who don't play a lot of open world games, I think they'll truly love it. But when we've seen an era of what Nintendo's done with Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom on far lesser hardware, when we've seen an era of, like you mentioned, Ghost of Tsushima and a variety of other great open world games from the last 5 to 10 years, they've really got to step up their game, and it can't just be Star Wars, Assassin's Creed. It's got to be something awesome. So I'm hoping for that, but we will see. Darth Delgado says, "I enjoyed Jedi Survivor. Didn't see the twist at the end coming. This game had a chance to be the best Star Wars story in Disney canon, and if they get the last game, sticks the landing." I think, yeah. So you're talking about the Jedi series. I thought you were talking about Outlaws. Outlaws reading that. Yeah, I would agree that the Jedi series has a chance to be one of the best stories in Star Wars canon. It has been great so far. I don't think Outlaws will be the best story in Star Wars canon, if that's what you're meaning by your comment. But I'm pretty sure you mean the Jedi series. So I would agree that it can be one of the best. But let's get to the chat here. Let's go back. That's covered all of our stories, right, Sanak, for the
Yep, those
for the
are all
video.
three of our big stories.
All right. So yeah, we are going to go back to the chat. And for those of you just joining us or watching on replay, we did have a couple other streams that were crashing. We reset and everything seems to be working all right now. So we do have questions from those other streams that we're going to pull Sorry that you cannot see them. Wish we could share them somehow. We'll have to figure out a way to possibly get pictures in and stuff in the future. But I did take screenshots of these questions. So we're going to start from the top, first come, first serve, and then we will get back to this chat. So you guys should keep sending in questions to the chat. We don't have too many from the other stream, so we might get back to this chat. If you want to make sure you get one in, no matter what stream it was on, to send in a super chat. We will bump yours up to the top. All right, so back to the screenshot here. We have Anthony, who sent in the very first question of the day and said, just wanted to say that Liam has a great collection of Star Wars books. Thank you so much, Anthony. I do pride myself on my collection. I'm trying to catch up to him. I have about 30 Star Wars books, mostly from canon and some from Legends. That's a good start. Just today, I decided to get back into reading Star Wars again, and I'm on Star Wars Tales of Light and Life. I'm mostly done with Phase 1, but I've not read anything past that since last year, mostly because I was busy with college, but also because I felt bad for liking the High Republic, as people on Reddit and Twitter are calling me woke because I liked it. Thank goodness I found you guys and some other cool people to discuss Star Wars with. You guys are one of the lone candles that can ignite the star. Favorite novelization of any film for me is Revenge of the Sith novelization. By the way, love Legends Lore channel. Thank you. That's my second channel. For those of you who don't know, shameless plug, but go subscribe there. Have a lot of great Star Wars book content as well on there. And then Anthony says, love Legends of Lore channel. Been subscribed for a few months now. Appreciate it, Anthony. I recently though watched the best Star Wars What If video I've ever watched. It was described as what would happen if Palpatine won on Exegol and if Rey and Ben were killed. The future was described as very dark. I almost would. Okay, so first, I appreciate all your comments. Let's talk a little bit about the Star Wars book collection you've got going here. Glad you're reading the High Republic. It is very good, and we really appreciate your thoughts and your opinions on our High Republic coverage. We do love covering the High Republic, as you've seen from the stream, so it is a fun series to go through. But yeah, Tales of Light in Life would technically be the next thing you were reading if you weren't going to read Phase 2 after Phase 1, so that's a good place to go. It will have some things, I guess, kind of spoilers, but not too spoilerish for Phase 2 if you ever do decide to read it, so you could skip those Phase 2 tie-in stories if you wanted to. But there are a couple that are kind of essential to read with Eye of Darkness. There are things that are referenced in the Eye of Darkness that I remember reading Eye of Darkness and thinking, man, has it just been because it's 2 years since I've read High Republic Phase 1? Because I don't really remember a couple of these things. And then I went back and read Tales of Light and Life, and I was like, oh yeah, there are things here that you kind of need to know. So I do think it's a worthy thing to read right now, and then get into Eye of Darkness, and then the rest of Phase 3.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I mean, you can also read just the comic miniseries, Shadows of Starlight, but
Mhm.
even with like one of the crucial stories that is in place for Eye of Darkness with the character, when a couple sets of characters, the comic is like the story is in Tales of Light and Life, right? So you only get like the beginning and the very end of it pictured, and then the
Yeah.
rest you have to read. So yeah, I mean, you could always do a Wikipedia article search or something for sure, but yeah, they really want you to read this collection of short stories. It is really a bridge from phase 1 to 3 and parts of phase 2 into 3. Some that don't really feel connected from phase 2 just because of the nature of it, but phase 3 has been pulling more from phase 2 than expected character-wise and plot-wise.
And then back to your thing about the what if video about Palpatine on Exegol. Um, you said it was described. The future was described as very dark. I almost would love if they did a story about the new Sith Empire that Sidious would have if he had won. I think the light side of the Force at that point would be completely snuffed out by the dark, and Palpatine would truly be a god. He would almost be like Vitiate from the EU. It also makes the Rise of Skywalker a little more, as it shows, makes you like the Rise of Skywalker a little bit more, as it shows how close the Jedi and light side came to ultimate defeat, and it shows how impactful the Skywalker family was defeating the evilest Sith Lord. We'll have to check that video out. If you want to send a link to the chat, we can check it out after the stream is over. But thank you so much for recommending that. Anthony also says, what's your guys' favorite High Republic novel so far? Mine is Tempest Runner and The Rising Storm. Those are great ones. Tempest Runner, actually, I liked, but I didn't love. So I'm glad you enjoyed Tempest Runner. For me, it is Light of the Jedi is my favorite. We have done rankings of these. If you want to check out our rankings, we've done a tier list. And then over on my other channel, I did do a top 10 High Republic books, if you want to check that out as well. But for me, it would be The Light of the Jedi, and Rising Storm would be my easy top two. And then in one that's super underrated that nobody still talks about, I really do love the Cataclysm book from High Republic Phase 2. It is so good, and yes, you do have to kind of slog through everything in Phase 2 to get there, but Phase 2 is actually really good. Just Convergence is the only one you really have to like slog through. But yeah, you do have to read something before it, but I highly recommend it. It's so good. So those are my three favorites for sure.
Yeah, no, I wasn't the biggest fan of Tempest Runner either because ultimately it does feel like it's just more of Lorna D kind of doubling down for who she is, which is fine. I think that is what's perfectly in line with her character. It's just not a story that I really appreciated outside of it being a fantastic audio drama. Like this was so well done. I think Until Battle of Jeddah was probably my favorite, up there with Dooku Jedi Lost as well. So yeah, I mean, great in that format. You know, it's been great to see the High Republic really take advantage of the young adult medium, take advantage of these audio dramas, like really flesh out just how expansive a multimedia initiative in Star Wars can be in the modern day. So yeah, really, really like that. I mean, the next thing left really for the High Republic, now that we've even had a TV show, is a video game, honestly, which hey, I wouldn't mind if like the 100-year gap between the shows gets like an MMO or something. I would
That'd be
absolutely
awesome.
kill for something like that. I'm glad that you mentioned Rising Star, Anthony, too, because that is my favorite High Republic novel still. I still think it's like chef's kiss, just perfect to me. And Light of the Jedi is also up there. I mean, those are both for us S tier books. I know Liam puts it a little ahead of Rising Storm for him, but that just tells you how strong like phase one really was. And I know we were all at home, it was COVID and all that, but these were like really, really strong adult novels, right? It in comparison, that's what makes Fallen Star a disappointment because everything is honing in on that book. Every medium associated with the High Republic is like converging into that book, and it's claustrophobic. It's very limited in its scope. It's more just like an extended conclusion, and you can't really see much variety or exploration or like triumph like you would with these other books, right? So yeah, I mean, that should just and that's still, I think, a pretty solid book. I think if we just didn't have Rising Storm and Light of the Jedi, I would have considered that like a pretty solid to great book. Cataclysm, also definitely say that's fantastic. Path of Deceit, that young adult novel from Phase Two, is probably the strongest young adult novel for me of the High Republic. I really do like that. And for middle grade books, I guess I would go still for the first one, A Test of Courage. That is the first Vernestra book. Justina Ireland, like we've been saying on the stream, she really crafted the character. She understands the character the best. And that is one of the most mature middle grade novels still that I've read. Basically, anytime Vernestra is in that medium, it elevates the middle grade writing to a different level for sure. But yeah, no, I mean those are great books, Anthony. Glad that you brought those up.
Everybody else in the chat, what's your favorite High Republic book if you've read them? Because those are, I think those are definitely towards the top. I'd agree. A Test of Courage is still my favorite junior novel in High Republic, and then Path of Deceit to me is by far the best young adult book we've seen in the High Republic. Kind of surprisingly, I feel like the High Republic young adult has been the most inconsistent. We had like Into the
Yeah.
Dark is still one of the best ones, and that was our first one. Everything else since then has been kind of a roller coaster. There are highs and lows in almost everything. Some really lows, some things that were pretty high, like Path of Deceit. But even Path of Vengeance over time has not been as great as I remember it being right when we reread it. It just doesn't stick with me as much. It does kind of have a slog of a middle act.
Oh,
But it's still a really good book. That one and Into the Dark. But yeah, there's not. I'm hoping for a return. We have Claudia Gray writing the next young adult novel, or I guess the one after this September one, which is George Mann, who also has been great in the High Republic. So I'm
yeah.
looking forward to his young adult book. But yeah, I'm hoping that Claudia Gray one is like a true seminal finale for the young adult side of the High Republic, because that storytelling has just kind of been all over the place with which characters are involved, which stories we're focusing on, with who's the POV of that side of the universe. Whereas adult novels, even though Avar has come and gone with phase one to phase three, Elzar has been our permanent character who's just in every single adult book, and he kind of carries that load. So and so is Markion Rowe, I guess. So hopefully we kind of have a like an Avengers style finale for phase 3 with Claudia Gray's book, where it ties in all of those sides of the High Republic young adult universe. Okay, so
Yeah.
back to the chat here. We have more so a lot of talk from last time about the stream, and then Ovier says, hey guys, hope you guys are having a great day. Not Star Wars related, but did you guys watch the new Deadpool movie, Deadpool and Wolverine? And do you read X-Men comics? Well, thanks so much for your question. And again, everybody, this is an example of what you can do with these news and ask us anything streams. You can ask us anything you want. So if you want to talk about X-Men or Marvel or DC, let us know in the chat. I would say keep the Deadpool stuff a little spoiler free, because it is new. So maybe wait another week or so to talk about Deadpool spoilers. But I will say I have seen the movie and I really enjoyed it. I liked it more than Deadpool 2. I don't think it's as good of a movie as Deadpool 1, but certainly the most entertaining and fun movie in that series. Um, and I thought all the stuff in it was really, really entertaining. I think by the nature of a movie like that, a crossover movie, you do lose some of the stuff that makes the Deadpool series unique, and that has been a heavy focus on character. Yes, there's absurdity and comedy, but there's a heavy focus on the character of Wade Wilson and the people who populate his world. I would say that was missing for me. That was the big thing that was missing for me with this one, because it does so focus on the multiverse stuff and Wolverine, that that was missing. But Hugh Jackman is so good, and Ryan Reynolds is the perfect Deadpool, and I can't wait to see more, and I can't wait to see this story really start to expand and become a hopefully a big part of what we have for the future of the MCU. But yeah, that's my little mini review you can have of it. And as for X-Men comics, I do read X-Men comics. I'm not really up to date with anything really besides whatever the latest Star Wars trade paperbacks are in the world of comics. I tried to catch up and get into Hickman's X-Men as it was coming out, because it was coming out during the beginning of the pandemic. And then, as the pandemic went on, just had so many things to read, and our channel started getting bigger, and I started reading more and more Star Wars comics to keep up, and just fell off of it. So I think the last new X-Men thing I read was X of Swords. And then I've read most of the beginning of the Byrne and Claremont run, as well as some of the Whedon run. I've read sorry, I'm gonna look over on my shelf. I've read some of the Wolverine stuff from Miller. I've read a lot. I've read the Lee and Claremont stuff. So yeah, I've read a lot of X-Men. I haven't read it start to finish though, and that is like a bucket list thing to do. I've slowly been accumulating every X-Men omnibus over the years, and I've kind of hoped to do a full binge read from like the beginning of the Claremont run, which I've read pretty much everything from the first like 4, 5, 6 years of that run. So it'd be a lot of rereading, but hopefully from the beginning of that run all the way through the end of Claremont's time with X-Men, I would really like to do a full read through and then move into Hickman's stuff as it continues to get collected and in its reading order. But yeah, if you enjoy X-Men, let us know what your favorite comics are in the X-Men universe. I mean, there's a lot of classics that I have loved, but if there is anything that maybe that a typical like mainstream X-Men fan wouldn't know about, let us know in the chat. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I also got to see it this weekend. Definitely a pretty big fan of it. I was going in with pretty moderate expectations. I think the shows that have in the movies outside of Loki have not really nailed multiverse, and it's hard. Like this is a problem that was there in comics too. It's hard, especially when you have crossover comics and different teams and groups involved with multiverse shenanigans to really nail it across the board. And they haven't done a great job with Disney Plus either in general with Marvel, so it's a surprise to say that, like, oh great, like the multiverse stuff of Loki, which I finally got around to seeing season 2, finished it like just an hour or two before I went to see Deadpool and Wolverine. That stuff is great. Like, I saw season 1 was coming out, season 2 just as good. It's a lot more about, like, filling in the gaps, stretching out, like, the details, the cracks that are forming. So, it is, like, a rather mature sequel when it comes to MCU, but definitely one that was fascinating. So, yeah, I mean, I was excited for that. I think Multiverse of Madness had some fun things, but its cameos just felt like cameos as opposed to like, extended ones that have real relevance to plot and what's going on here. So, yeah, and I wasn't a biggest I felt like that was a pretty average movie by the end. Like, I thought I liked it a little bit more when I first saw it. Now it's like, okay, it's okay. Raimi's really
Yeah.
carrying that film for me, but I was like, "Man, if you're gonna call it the Multiverse of Madness with a character who can literally jump between the multiverse, like, man, like, I I wish you could have done a little bit more." And, that I think that's a movie that was also hampered by the fact that it was supposed to come out before No Way Home, right? And we would have seen American Chavez in No Way Home originally being like how she was able to transport all these different Spider-Men and the villains in, right? Which I think would have been pretty fascinating to see and would have made that character so much more relevant to current MCU as opposed to just being the one-off that we have of her. Like, I feel like people know about Xochitl more as a person than they do about her character at this point, which, you know, it is pretty frustrating. But No Way Home, pretty good. It is another film that felt like, okay, we're just gonna deal with the legacy of Sony, the legacy of Spider-Man and his villains there, and how it's handled. It's definitely an event film, right? And there are like moments when they're talking and reacting to characters, and it's very much like, okay, this is like gonna be quiet for a few minutes because we want people to react to it. We want people to talk about these characters, right? So yeah, I enjoyed it. I still think it's probably the best MCU Spider-Man that we've gone for sure. But yeah, it doesn't feel the same level of weight and connection as we got with Deadpool and Wolverine, which I thought to be a lot more fascinating, a lot more fun for sure. So great movie. I do think that whatever we have here for the character of Deadpool moving into the MCU, it's gonna be strange. It's gonna be weird. It's gonna be fun regardless of what happens. I think when you have Ryan Reynolds basically leak out the footage of Deadpool for so many years and finally admit that, like, yeah, that's the only reason we have Deadpool is because I took studio property and videos and test footage and forced their hand. And to now the point of like he's Marvel Jesus, he saved the MCU. I kind of buy it because it was a fun movie and the cameos felt right. It was a real love for the Fox era of Marvel heroes too, which I really did appreciate. So yeah, pretty great. I myself have not really read
Yeah.
any X-Men comics, but I have definitely seen a lot of X-Men on TV. Not so much the animated series. I saw a lot of X-Men Evolution as a kid, so I'm pretty excited to see what's going to be drawn from that. What's going to be drawn from X-Men '97, of course, being that massive success. What's drawn from the current comics, which are really weird. I mean, Cassandra Knows is a pretty fun villain, but I know that's not really how she's like in the comics. But for being like a Fox foil, a mirror to what we have with Charles Xavier. I thought that was pretty good. So yeah, I really liked it. It's a messy film, but it's like the messy that I loved about the Fox Marvel films.
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely agree. I think it's then Multiverse of Madness. I think leaving Multiverse of Madness the first time, it was more of the excitement that was the high than it really was any thoughts about this being a great movie. I don't. I think as it's aged, as we've gotten it for longer and longer, it feels less good every year. But Deadpool, I think, is a competently structured film, and I think that's what Multiverse of Madness was missing. It was just so bland and basic in its structure, and messy there, that Deadpool is at least more competent in its structure. It does the willy-nilly randomness of the story fits Deadpool far more than it fits another character, right? Especially with the fourth wall breaks. So there were some great things, and I really did enjoy it. And yeah, hopefully they make more. And I'm happy that Hugh Jackman's a part of this world now too. I don't want him to permanently be our Wolverine. I hope we get a true X-Men story in the MCU, and we could talk about Robert Downey Jr. later if you guys want to about Doom. I hope we get true versions of some of these characters, but as for now, until we get through the end of Secret Wars, I'm very happy that Hugh Jackman is back and that we get all of this stuff coming into the MCU. It's about time, really. So those were all our questions from the last stream. So we're going to go through everything here in this chat right now. And again, we are about the hour mark. We usually go about an hour and a half on these news streams. So send us in your last questions, and then we will try to get to as many as possible. If you want to support the channel and make sure you get a comment on the stream today, send in a super chat. It greatly helps us out. And we always appreciate all of your support and for watching us every week. So thank you so much. And without further ado, let's get back to the chat here. And it's Anthony again who says, I hope we eventually get a book that shows where Ahsoka was in the original trilogy. I hope so too. It doesn't need to be a book. I hope it's just in any format whatsoever. Whether it's a Tales of the Jedi tie-in type story, whether it's a whole series or season of an animated show, whether it's in flashbacks in the Ahsoka show. But a book would be pretty awesome. I think that would probably be up there amongst my first choice for seeing that story played out.
I don't know. I don't know where I'd want her, right? Like the biggest thing I care about knowing is the stuff with Sabine and becoming an apprentice, right? If you're gonna make sensitive, and you can definitely build off like some wording and dialogue and hints that we have with her training with Kanan and Rebels, but it has to happen, right? I wish we at least got like 5 to 10 minutes of it in episode 3, especially of Ahsoka. I think that would have been a pretty good place to put it. And then, the reason for their separation a little bit more tied into like episode 6 and 7. That doesn't happen in the Ahsoka show. That is probably the biggest weakness of the show for me. It's like, okay, you made this strong choice for this character, very EU like in making someone who's well experienced, has been involved with the rebellion and fighting, and then they had the Force, right? Okay, well, if that happens, well, tell us how that happened, especially if they're going to be trained by Ahsoka of old people who has disavowed things with the Jedi, disavowed the Jedi way, kind of gone her own direction, just trying to be a light side user. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know how it's gonna happen. I just need it to be tied to Sabine's story.
I think it should be kind of like this Acolyte book if we did get a book where it's a true kind of prequel story. Maybe bring in some of the elements of what possibly or Rebels season 5 was going to be, and then bridge that story. I do think it's something worth telling eventually. Knowing kind of Filoni's schedule and how many things he's involved with right now, I wouldn't be shocked if we talked about last week. I wouldn't be shocked if we actually get season 2 of Tales of the Jedi, like it's still rumored for October ish. If part of that story is the Ahsoka story bridging between uh, the Malachor stuff and eventually where you see her in the beginning of the Ahsoka show and the end of Rebels. I think that's a very strong possibility to have 3 episodes about Ahsoka again. And if it is that story, I'd be interested in it. I do think it's a story that's more expansive than 3 short episodes of an animated show, but I feel like right now Ahsoka is untouchable by anybody else but Filoni. He has complete lock on that character. And so if we ever see a book, it will be just purely graced to us, kind of like the Ahsoka book was last time, which is stories that they never got to tell that they didn't think they would get to tell. And I think that's where it would go again. But Anthony also says, do we think that we will see in Mando season 4 or Ahsoka season 2 Ezra meeting Luke? It would not be impossible. Hera knows Luke and can introduce them to each other. I do think we'll see that at some point. I would be shocked if Luke's not involved in some fashion at some point in this overall story, especially in the movie with the New Republic movie that Dave Filoni's still supposed to be directing. But I don't know if it would be Mando. I don't think Mando would be the place for it in season 4. You have a possibility in the movie of Luke showing up just because it's a big, huge spectacle. And right now, with what we've seen Disney is willing to pay somebody like Robert Downey Jr. or the Russo brothers. They're willing to shell out big bucks for things they hope will be big hits and kind of restore faith in these brands. I appreciate that about the direction that they're trying to go in, especially. And we've heard them say so many times they want to go back to quality over quantity, and I really appreciate that approach. And I think throwing money at the people that could make these things the best they can be is a smart decision as long as the stories are good. So I'm not pointing out the possibility of seeing a lot of CGI Luke, but it's still I still would find it surprising if it was in Mandalorian over Ahsoka.
Yeah, because I mean, it's a pretty difficult thing to even like juggle, right? In comparison to the MCU, where everything has been movie based and everything has had an established decade of storytelling to build off of. I think one of the biggest issues about deepfake Luke is that he's good for a couple appearances. He's good for like moments, but he's not good for like a full-fledged character. No, I wouldn't want that. I'd want the recast. And is it make sense to almost go with the live action show, right? Instead of a movie or a book or whatever? Yeah, maybe. I mean, you kind of almost have to build up whoever is the new person. I get that sense too, but it is tough, right? It is that question of like, are we really gonna see Star Wars at this point, this many years removed from Star Wars in the live action big screen format, just like throw out a new character who is gonna play arguably the most iconic and important character in Star Wars history? I don't know. That it's gonna be tough, and then bringing in Ezra immediately into that, I know. I mean, I feel like you almost have to lay out what this new Luke is doing with his academy, what he's been doing on his travels, maybe some Lore Santeca stuff to kind of connect more with the sequel adjacent material, and then you get to Ezra. I still think Ezra can do quite a bit before he actually even discusses things with Luke or does things with Luke, right? He might be working more with Hera. He might be working with Zeb and, really trying to set the stakes for the galaxy and prepare for the choice that Sabine made in order for him to come back home. I think Ezra meeting Luke, as cool as it is, I don't know if it's gonna happen right away because you almost have to have Ezra be like the first person trying to convince the New Republic Defense Fleet, okay, this is what we need to be doing. Luke's not a military figure anymore. He's just kind of a hermit doing his own thing, and I feel like if we're gonna lean into what we've seen already from Ezra and Rebels and all that, he doesn't go to like an Obi-Wan Kenobi right away or anything. It takes a while, right? So I figure maybe that's something more of a mid-season Ahsoka season 2, or maybe a nice like one-off Disney Plus feature, like a special presentation. It has to be important on its own. It doesn't necessarily have to be tied to like the narrative that's going on, right? You don't see the Ahsoka and Luke meeting when arguably you could have made that the focus of Book of Boba Fett episode 6 instead, right? Like, oh, this is the first time they're meeting each other. But they're like, no, it's kind of implied that's already happened. So these like meetings, I don't know if they're that important at this point. They're more important once we have the academy flourishing, once other Jedi who can kind of come into the picture and shape the stakes of the galaxy kind of appear, like a Cal Kestis, like people have mentioned, who might have a difference of ideology of having been Boken Jedi, having not been raised in the temple, having not been raised by Kenobi or Yoda, right? But at this point in the timeline, I don't know if Ezra meeting Luke is going to be like something that is like so big and huge, right? Like, and yeah, I know Hera already knows about Luke and has already like worked with him before in the comics and all. But there's gonna be an adjustment period, or either way for Ezra. I wouldn't think that the first thing he wants to do is to run into the guy who's basically taken over his place as the de facto Jedi of the galaxy and done that 10 to 100 times more than he ever did.
Right, and one of the things that I think you can follow with legends here too about Luke is the fact that he doesn't just restore the Jedi Order right away. He takes a long time to restore the Jedi Order. So, what do we see with the effects of now his first student leaving him again with Grogu? There's a lot of story there. And then when he does restore the Jedi Order in in Legends, he has to get Senate approval, and it's a whole like political process. So what does his distance from New Republic military, from New Republic politics, what does that mean for the Jedi's place in the galaxy? And I think it would tie in nicely to ultimately the fall of Ben Solo and the fall of Kylo Ren. If there's some of that political distrust around the Jedi to the point where it's another driving factor for Luke to go MIA and go into exile, similar to how he does in Fate of the Jedi, where you see this pressure on him to handle all these things, plus hopefully some other factors all leading to his disappearance and his downfall. So the political side is interesting. I think in a conflict like this, like I said, I still think he's going to show up at some point. He's just too big of a character not to. But will I understand what you're saying? Where like, do do we need a scene that's dedicated to Luke and Ezra meeting? Probably not. But that does feed into Anthony's next question, which says, "What do you think that Ezra and Luke would think of each other? I could see Luke tell Ezra that he is now in charge of the new Jedi Order. Would Ezra accept Luke's leadership?" And I think that's something that's more interesting overall than just kind of their initial meeting. It's the working together, and that's the type of stuff that I don't know if you'll really see in the show when Luke does show up. When he shows up, it's going to be for action sequences or short dialogue sequences or just to stand there in the background. You're not going to have full on philosophy scenes, and so if you want that, it's going to have to be either animation recast or a book. But I would like to see that, as Ezra is somebody who's trained outside of the Jedi Order, so is Luke, but Luke is trying to restore the old ways. There is a lot of interesting stuff there. So hopefully we do see some connection to them in the future, but because they are two varying perspectives of similar types of beings, people formed from the ashes of the Republic and into something where they both have very separate destinies, but very important destinies. Darth Delgado says, "Could you guys do a video of books and comics to read before the Legends New Jedi Order?" Well, funny you should say that, Darth Delgado, because we do have a series right now that is coming out that I've been working on about every Star Wars book and comic and video game and movie and TV show and everything you can read for Star Wars Legends, the Legends timeline. One of the reasons you haven't seen a new episode in a while is because next one is the Clone Wars, and that is incredibly complicated. I have found it. I have made all the graphics, and I'm currently editing everything together. So you should probably see it within the next week to week and a half. After the Clone Wars, it will be the Dark Times, then the Rebellion era, then the New Republic era. So the New Republic era is probably what you're talking about, everything leading up to New Jedi Order. So it will be 4 videos away. So if you can wait maybe about a month, a month and a half, we will have a video out for you so you know everything to read up to New Jedi Order. And then there will be a New Jedi Order video for it too. So then you could see everything and how you read New Jedi Order in a chronological order as well, with the comics and stuff too, with Invasion and the Chewbacca comic and all that. So hopefully that helped you out. Anthony says, "I could see Ezra seeing Luke is very powerful. One thing that has been bugging me is, do you think that Ahsoka knows why Anakin fell to the dark side? And do you think what do you think she would think of Anakin's fall? And do you think Ahsoka knows Padme is Luke's mother?" That's an interesting question. I would imagine she does, because at this point she's met Luke. She's met the ghost of Anakin in wherever place she met him. Um, I would assume she knows, and she does know about their romance in the Clone Wars, and she does when she leaves and when Anakin says to her, I know more than anybody how much uh, about thinking about leaving the Jedi Order," and she says, "I know." There's like a kind of a unspoken connection between the two of them, where she's like, "Yeah, I know the reasons why you want to leave, and I'm not going to say anything, but you can trust me," kind of that kind of relationship. So I think she knows about Padme and Anakin. And I do think, what was your other part of your question about Anakin turning to the dark side? I do think she's really heard variations of that story from Luke, and I think she kind of saw variations of it in her. We'll probably see more and learn more about Anakin here in future seasons of Ahsoka.
Ahsoka definitely knows, right? And it's not I don't think it's even just the romance that's implied that she understands, right? Like the whole I understand more than you think, right? That he tells Ahsoka at the end of season 5 Clone Wars, and she says, "I know." It's like, yeah, that is related to wanting to leave the order, but as far as like warfare and everything, that's part of the flashback that she kind of has of like going through the memory again. She sees Anakin and how he copes with the war and how she's coping as a child soldier and all that. But she's around. She knows, like, when Obi-Wan is kinda agrees to the Jedi Order, the Council's decision of, like, keeping this and he almost basically tells the Council it's better to keep Anakin in the dark when they're doing the whole Rako Hardeen storyline where he's imitating him and then how he looks, right? So it's like she's around for these events. She knows these lies. She's seen these traumatic things. This is a war that they're still in. Of course she sees some of that darkness, right? Like the whole question of slavery when she brings it up with Obi-Wan, like, why is this touched a nerve more than a lot of other things for Anakin? It's like, well, because Anakin was a slave. Oh, he didn't tell me that, right? So as a Padawan, she sees what Anakin tells her, but as a person, she understands that sometimes just observing him when he's not saying anything, when he's not responding, or how he's reacting to certain things speaks a lot more. So yeah, I think she saw more than most people, even Obi-Wan, like why he was following some of the darker elements about him for sure.
Well, we're about 15 minutes away from wrapping up the stream. So if you guys have last questions, comments, things you would like to ask during this week's stream, send them into the chat and we will try to get to them as soon as possible. If you haven't liked the video yet, please like the video and subscribe if you are new. We do this every single week. So make sure you come back and join us every week. And if you'd like to support the channel and get your chat on for sure, super chats are always greatly appreciated. But that is your prerogative. It is completely up to you. All right. Critical Thinker says, oh, wait, we answered that one about Ubisoft. Yes. And then we actually have answered quite a few of these. So I'm going down. And I think the next one is Critical Thinker saying, if Cal Kestis doesn't die, I'd love to see Jedi. We need some members of Luke's order. Don't kill Kylo or leave after one episode.
Yeah, no, I mean, it'll be nice to see if they do bring in like a Corran Horn truly fleshed out, like you're saying. Like, yes, Ezra and Cal already fill that role. I don't think you necessarily need to bring in EU Jedi. But I think cool. I'd like Corran with his Obi-Wan Kenobi cameo to actually turn out into a character. My only problem is, as much of a Horn fan as I've been with Jedi and everything, I'm not the biggest fan of some of his characterization in the X-Wing books. He is kind of convenient. He is kind of just gets the way he gets things in any which way and form before he even gets Jedi powers. So I find that a little annoying.
I do agree. I think Corran and Kyle, Cal and Ezra can kind of be our next Corran and Kyle. I do have a lot of similarities to older Jedi who can move more directly into and teach and also learn from Luke. I think that unity would be something I would very much like to see. And then the extra galactic side of New Jedi Order, going into different galaxies, going into different the unknown regions and going to unexplored space. I think it would be cool to explore Tanalorr and have this kind of like we have the Lost Tribe of the Sith and Legends have this almost Lost Tribe of the Jedi thing with Cal and have this separate group this with different rules and the way they play on whether it's Luke or Rey's future. I think a lot of that would be really neat. So yes, I would love to see Cal Kestis continue. I hope he doesn't die in the games because I think Cameron Monaghan it would be he literally they used his face, so he would be
Yeah.
perfect for a live action version. And I think that would be a massive missed opportunity for them if they don't do it.
Yeah, no, I mean, we'll see. I do want some EU characters. I don't necessarily want like the Jedi Academy cast because I feel like when they're first introduced, they're not like you're saying with Rise of Kylo Ren and all that. They're not really traditionalists, but they're still trying to be traditionalists. That's the funny thing about Jedi Academy. It does feel like Luke is trying to do things as close as possible to the old ways, versus what we've seen so far. Luke is very much tied to High Republic exploration and like excavations of old sites and ancient texts and all that. And yet we got Book of Boba Fett where he's like, nope, you got to make a choice between attachment and not attachment. I'll give you Yoda's lightsaber, or you can take your father's little Mandalorian armor that he's created for you when he's talking to Grogu. And that's the one that gives me a little bit pause, because how does he go from that to very prequel-esque order that we see in Rise of Kylo Ren? We know Ezra's back in the galaxy. At some point, they have to connect. This Cal Kestis around, like you said, is this? Are we just going to keep him fully disconnected until like a Rey's New Jedi Order or something? Not sure. I think it'll be fun either way. I've been definitely vouching from the start that a lot of Luke's struggles with his academy won't necessarily be big attacks or anything, but it'll be more like other Jedi don't want to do Jedi things the way that he does it, and could
Right.
argue pretty fairly like, you were trained by Yoda, you were trained by Kenobi, right? Like, it's great that these are legendary Jedi masters, but these are the same people who told you, go kill your father, didn't tell you about who your father really was. And I don't think, especially if there are any Order 66 survivors around to start off, and he's with a lot of these like adults who turn into Jedi, that these adult Jedi would necessarily listen to Luke. They'd be like, well, we've got this older guy, or this Ahsoka figure and all that, and they're showing off all the flaws of this. Why are we trying to mimic it? Right? I'm right now, a lot of the Luke from Book of Boba Fett onwards is a little confusing to me. It feels very much like Boba Fett and his origin with Kamino, with cloning, with his life as Jabba's biggest enforcer, to how he's become right now. Like, it's a little uneven right now. And that's not even to throw in the Clone Wars arc where he's like got his own crew and everything on Tatooine. That's kind of how I feel about Luke post Return of the Jedi right now in canon. I think it'll turn into something pretty solid, because I feel like whatever's been laid there is pretty good, other than some of the choices in Book of Boba Fett, how he's treating Grogu. But you can easily work around that. You can easily retcon it, and you can still give him these struggles that will leave him almost like the isolationist, traditionalist Jedi that he isn't really, but is almost trying to force himself into.
Yeah, yeah, and you could easily retcon some of the Rise of Kylo Ren stuff. I agree. I like it. It's really just one page of like a
Yeah.
shot of Luke training a bunch of kids. So maybe the rest of the Jedi are off doing something else.
Yeah.
It's pretty easy to explain away. But I do kind of like the idea of possibly Grogu ditching Luke and being like, your rules kind of suck. I'm leaving, going back to my dad. Um, that kind of almost being like the corn horn kick in the ass he gets in I
Yeah.
Jedi, where it's just like, hey, we don't have to all follow the exact same thing that you want to do. Maybe you're thinking about it the wrong way. That reshapes how Luke trains everybody from then on. Like
Yeah.
it's a small moment in the books, but it's kind of a big one because it changes a lot of stuff. And so that itself was a retcon. so, uh,
Yeah.
so like you
Yeah.
can, I want to see Legends characters like Critical Thinker says. I want to, of course, see Korn return properly since he got his cameo in Obi-Wan Kenobi, assuming they don't ruin the character. And I think we will. Like, I hope Rogue Squadron is possibly in this New Republic era, especially now that like when Rogue Squadron was announced, the New Republic era wasn't the biggest era of Star Wars. We were still in the sequel time. Like it was announced in 2020 when we're coming off of 4 out of 5 billion-dollar movies, and 3 of them were sequel related. So I think that was the thinking. But if you shift it around and make Cornhorn the main character and do a story in the New Republic era or right before the New Republic era, that would be awesome. And I think it would be a great way to bring in that character and that side of the Star Wars story and connect to what they're doing now. And you don't have to even change anything. And the only recast you might have to do is Wedge, which most
Yeah.
people wouldn't know anyways. So that would be awesome. And so I do really want to see a lot of Legends characters, but we don't have to see, Cam or Tion or some of these other random Gantoris. We don't need to see these characters. I'd love to see Dorsk 81. Hopefully he comes back too. But yeah, we're in an interesting era for Star Wars, and they're in an era where they got to make some big decisions. And speaking of that, another shameless plug. I have another video that will be coming out this week about that future. But okay, so we'll get to these last couple questions. Hopefully we can survive, or the stream can survive for the next 5 minutes until we answer his last couple questions. First, we have Anthony who says, "Would you like to see a What If Palpatine won on Exegol book?" So what ifs in Star Wars are interesting. I like that they're kind of relegated right now, personally, to fans, and it's because I feel like we can kind of come up with more. We're so obsessive, we can kind of come up with more great what if scenarios than possibly even they can. But I wouldn't mind a what if show or what if comic series or what if book series or short story book series, but I don't want us to go down a rabbit hole of starting to do like what if novels and we have this whole like what if universe. I'm not opposed to continuing Legends, and that's kind of part of this other video coming out soon. I'm not opposed to going back to Legends. I'm not opposed to doing other timelines in Star Wars, but what if is just kind of I don't think it's suited for the book format. I think it's suited for short stories. I think it's suited for short format television, and I think it's suited for comics, but I don't know if I would say a novel.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of what Infinities was, right? Like we got to
Right.
see episode 4, 5, 6, and they weren't connected either. That was the fun part. Like the first Infinities is like, what if certain things change in A New Hope? Okay, but that doesn't continue into the episode 5 one. It was just like imagine episode 4 went exactly as it went, and then 5 things changed, right? So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't mind it. I just think that it's nice already that Lucasfilm is printing these Legends books. I think a lot of other studios who had taken over for these franchise and all that would be like clean slate, especially since it's not comic books. It's very easy to just move on, and it's not like full of weight and like reverence in the same way that like a Tolkien's Legendarium has, where you can't really write new things into it. So Star Wars has always been a malleable franchise from the start, and that reset, even if you didn't love it, it made sense for at the time. It still makes sense, and Legend still gets printed. And I think that's a wonderful thing about it. But I do caution a little against it personally because it's the same story that we've been kind of hearing with the world between worlds ever since it was introduced in Rebels. Because they're like, okay, this is people who have literally been like, this is how we get back to Legends. This is how we erase the sequels and stuff like that. And I think these what if books are like a way for people to be like, okay, now if they start doing that, then you'll start hear the same thing. Like, what if Thrawn trilogy was real? What if it was it? And like, yeah, I think that would be cool. But then you already have the books and they're still being published. What ifs in canon? Like, yeah, I don't think I necessarily mind it. I think the closest we've gotten to that, it's Visions, really. But I don't know. Like, Ronan is kind of a what if in Star Wars, the novel of Ronan based off of that Vision season 1 short. And I don't know. I like it in case to case things. I just don't know if I'd want necessarily an initiative going on because that adds fuel to an unnecessary fire to me. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, if we have Legends restarted, all right, and more than just the Old Republic, but we get books like finishing off Legends, and then
Yeah.
that's what they segue into. Like, okay, we finished the Sword of the Jedi book series that was canceled. We finished volume 2 of the Star Wars Legacy comics. We put a couple things bridging it, and then we get in back into canon with what if versions of stories in canon. Yeah, I think that's fine, but I don't want it to like become like something that people just like they do with World Between Worlds, just think like, okay, this is now our way of going back to the way things were, or going back to the stories that we care about more, because it's not financially responsible or feasible.
Right. We'll never erase any timeline, and that's what I
Yeah.
hope never happens. Right. Like right now, Star Wars people argue that Star Wars can't have more than one timeline. It already does. Where there are two
Yeah.
timelines in Star Wars. There's the Legends timeline and there's Canon's timeline. It only feels like there's one timeline because Legends is, for all intents and purposes, a dead timeline. There's no new material being added outside of Old Republic expansions. So I think I have no problem going back and adding more of the Legends. I have no problem doing other timelines that aren't even a part of the two that we have. And I think what if can be in there. I don't want Star Wars to ever be a multiverse, but I'm okay with different Star Wars stories being told in a unique world. Visions is a perfect example of that. And I wouldn't even call Visions what if. They're really just a separate universe. And it's just the same as Infinities. I think Infinities is the closest thing to what if. And we've already seen it in comedic ways as well in Star Wars with like Lego Star Wars or Tag and Bink or other things like that. So there are those types of scenarios, and I that's why I do think comics or some type of animated series would be the two best. I think the animated series would be Comics would be preferable because it's the least read medium, so less people would be all frustrated if there was something in there that they liked more than the main continuity. And then animation is just so synonymous with actual impactful Star Wars storytelling that I think it would be tough to go to animation because people would just assume it's an important Star Wars story. So, but let us know what you guys think of that in the comments here. And then we'll get to the last thing, which is Critical Thinker says, I'm a big comic fan, but I mostly read DC. Yes, DC is the superior one. I'll say it here. And independent stuff. The only X-Men comics I've read are Avengers versus X-Men and Old Man Logan. Old Man Logan was pretty good. Avengers versus X-Men, not so much. Yeah, Avengers versus X-Men is it was a time in Marvel events. But and Logan, I actually do really like. I don't think it's a masterpiece, but it's really solid. I assume you're talking about the Mark Miller Old Man Logan, not the comic line Old Man Logan, which was started later as part of their multiverse storytelling with Jeff Lemire. Anyway, the Legends, yes, will. However, since our constant goal is to try between, going to be really excited to talk about. Sanak's been catching up to me with club episodes for Rogue Squadron and then Wedge's Gamble, and then as he gets through those, we'll continue to do Back to War and Kratos Trap. But we are thinking about. Oh, did it cut out again?
Yeah, you're cutting out for
Cut out one more
I
time.
think you might just want to restart that last one about Legends Book Club.
Okay, so restarting that quickly. Legends Book Club will continue. Sonic right now has been reading X-Wing, and he's catching up to me. We'll be doing both book reviews eventually, and then we will do Kratos Trap and Back to War when he's read those. But what Legends Book Club's kind of morphing and changing into something that, one, will be more about things we're excited to talk about, and two, we're possibly thinking of changing it into a live format like this, because then it's more of an actual book club. We can talk to you guys about the book and what your favorite things about the book are. So we're thinking of restructuring and reformatting so that you guys know well ahead of time when we're reading, when you have to have read them by, and then you can specifically discuss the books with us. So that's the kind of state of Legends Book Club, but hopefully sometime with next month or so, we'll be seeing reviews for Wedge's Gamble and Rogue Squadron, and then eventually Kratos Trap and Back to War. And that should kind of lead us up to when we get the final review of the last Wraith Squadron book out coming in November. So, because we do have reviews recently, there weren't Legends Book Club, but we have reviews recently for Wraith Squadron and Iron Fist. So that's Future of Legends Book Club, and that's the end of our stream. Thank you so much for watching this week's stream. As always, make sure you like the video. If you haven't, subscribe to the channel. If you're new, join us every week for our streams and our live Q&As. And then comment if you are on a replay. Comment below. Let us know what you thought of some of the topics or the chats we had today. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully it's a better stream next week with the quality and the internet connections and all that sort of stuff. But thank you so much for watching, everybody. We will see you all next time, and have a great night.